My PhD project involved working with racially minoritized women survivors of domestic abuse and their mental health and support-seeking experiences in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. The project has been in partnership with Humraz, a domestic abuse charity based in Blackburn, run by and for racially minoritized women. I have tried to use a participatory research approach, hoping to center equitable and inclusive ethics, but not without facing challenges on the way. There are a few key things that I have learned over the journey, and I think all researchers, particularly postgraduate researchers, should bear in mind. Historically, work with marginalized communities has led to mistrust of institutions and academics who have in the past had a grab-and-run approach through extractive, harmful research practices. As someone trying to do participatory research with them, we all need to be mindful of those histories. For a lot of us, when we go out in the field, there's a lot of reparative work that we do, reparation of the harm, addressing the over-consultation fatigue and the rightful skepticism of our partners, and trying to build the trust before we even get started on the research. As a PhD researcher, a lot of this work is not part of the curriculum and hence can be quite tricky for a lot of us to navigate, particularly if they haven't had exposure to such practices in their training. And a lot of the messiness, the fluidity, the deeply emotional work, they're generally not talked about in the academy. It isn't as much a part of the mainstream conversation as it should be. So, it is important to constantly reflect on questions like, how do we ensure care in our practice? How do we build relationships together to foster trust? As in my case, these behind-the-scenes relational work happen through sharing of countless meals, conversations about getting to know one another, sharing parts of oneself, the shared passion and anger for the injustice in the world and in our field, constant dialogue, communication, and catch-ups. All of this built trustworthy relationships, including friendships transcending beyond the research through our common investment in the topic, mutual learning, shared agendas for traversing the path together, resulting in shared ownership of the research process. While co-production and co-design has taken quite the center stage across many disciplines, the complexities in actually doing it well through an inclusive and equitable approach, attempting to address the power asymmetries, still needs a lot of unlearning. For instance, traditional research does not talk much about aftercare for the co-researchers and participants, or maybe just limits it to mere signposting to links and resources. But that is not enough. In practice, aftercare extends to ensuring availability of emotional care, maintaining connections, checking in with our partners in regular intervals. The aftercare extends to communities by asking them to define what it looks like, even as the formal project ends. Something I have continued to do through my ongoing involvement with my partner organization beyond the PhD. This also extends to the data, findings, and their dissemination by ensuring that they are used in appropriate ways, brought back to the community, and co-shared in the various dissemination approaches. In terms of doing participatory research, I have often found that it departs from the traditional understanding of institutional ethics. A lot of the questions are based on predictable trajectories of the research and rest on the distinction between the researcher and the researched. These considerations are largely incompatible with the highly collaborative aims, the emergent nature, and the relational practice of participatory research. The relational and embodied nature of my project meant I had to approach ethics beyond just the form. It was a deeply embedded and ongoing relational process throughout the project, through a sense of connectedness, mutual respect, and dignity between the researchers and the communities in which we are embedded in and work with. And these understandings of dignity and respect can mean different things to different people and may not always sit in line with the institutional conceptions. For instance, in my attempt to focus on the agency of the co-researchers and participants and respecting their dignity, choice, and safety, I had opted for the location of the interviews and workshops to be decided by them in my ethics form. But I had to navigate through the ethics board's understanding of vulnerability, reflected in their suggestions for me to decide the location instead, since the work involves vulnerable populations discussing sensitive topics. This is an example of the constant mismatch between the community's understanding and expectations with those of the institution. Some of the artifacts, images, policy and practice recommendations we generated together challenge the very idea of vulnerability and agency of the women. If they can co-design recommendations and even help put them in practice, do they not have the ability to decide where these interviews or workshops can be held? My ethics in practice therefore meant addressing power imbalance through a range of approaches. I conducted an ongoing dialogue with my research partners about sharing different roles and responsibilities. It was essential to be transparent about the institutional processes and timeframes. It was very important to pay partners for their time and involvement in the project. I took a flexible approach in terms of the preferred modes of contact, time, and location. It was vital to respect the need for expressing agency while balancing that with anonymity for their safety. It's also important to remember that the research project is not the only responsibility of the co-researchers, and their work and lives extend beyond that. Finally, I'd like to touch upon how I have often struggled with negotiating the individualism of doctoral research and the collectivism of participatory research. Collaboratively, we have developed the aims of the research, the plan of how to engage in it, the choice of the approach. We have also designed data collection measures, collected data and interpreted findings together, co-produced knowledge and action, took action and pushed for change through our co-produced outputs, where we engaged in shared meaning-making and ownership. But there are certain aspects of the research which I have had to undertake solely, such as reading the literature, sending summaries to the team, writing ethics applications, analyzing quantitative data, handling raw qualitative data, academically analyzing all the findings and presenting them academically through a thesis. I continue to reflect on questions such as, whose research is this? What do my participants get when I get a PhD? Have I managed to tell the full story of our shared and collaborative endeavor by writing the thesis by myself? Something that helps me to grapple with these challenges is to center the collaborative relationship with communities and their priorities. A useful approach to do so is the inclusion of partners early in the planning process. This is something I had managed to do in the project, where we created spaces to share and listen to how the partners would benefit and what they would need in the collaboration. Central to this is my work in the community through my role as the chair of the organization. Being part of the board allows me to implement the recommendations we generated, reflect on the aftercare, and advocate for changes in the policy and practice landscapes. My ongoing, embedded, and engaged activities beyond the PhD enable me to give back through a mutually beneficial practice, despite the constraints of the doctoral research expectations. While the PhD might mark the end, the work goes on. Undertaking participatory research within current institutional structures and research cultures can be challenging. I might not have all the answers to these challenges. This video may have even left you with some more unanswered questions. But I feel questions are good because they give us hope that there is opportunity for change.